I wanted to start. Well done, Nick. I was supposed to give him a signal to record, and that was the signal. We're going to start now. So, yes, I was going to start with just remembering the interview with Penny Sartori, who talked in her interview with Maitreya Bandhu, which they did a couple of weeks ago and was recorded and is available on the Adhisthana website on Nature of Mind. She talked about near-death experiences. That's what she's kind of well known for. She wrote a book. She did I think it was based on a PhD studies, and it was the first serious academic work or academic research into people who have experienced near-death experiences. And I remember one of the main things I got from that interview was suddenly the subject of death became kind of rather beautiful. It was almost like the experiences that people were having who had these near-death experiences seemed to be very, very positive on the whole. She did report that there were a couple of cases where people's experiences weren't so positive. And in the seminar that Maitreya Bandhu and Jnanavacha did, Jnanavacha mentions another book by, I think, an author called Grayson, who also researched in the States near-death experiences, and he only ever encountered people having positive experiences after death, or near death rather, so you can't come back from death, basically. That's what death is. But it was very positive for kind of myself, almost getting on in life, thinking, oh, it's maybe something almost to look forward to. But I certainly have no plans whatsoever to move the date forward when that's going to happen. But it just made me realize that, and I had been thinking about this since last year when I was at a talk at a hospice. I've been doing some work with someone at a hospice in Herefordshire, and of course they're dealing with people dying a lot. And a good friend of mine, she was giving a talk, and she talked about how when we can face death, when we can come to terms with death, it enhances life. The other thing that Penny Sartori mentioned, and Maitreya Bandhu and Jnanavacha drew out in their talk, was that people who had these experiences of coming very close to dying, to passing on, often, most of them seem to return to life in some way changed, sometimes in a very, very big way, that their life changed, the values changed, how what they did with their life changed. And it all seemed very, very positive. The changes seem to be, well, I would call them positive changes. They were changes that where they kind of felt the need to perhaps be more helpful to others. I don't know if I'm reading that into it, but that's kind of what I always think of positive, is where we are both kind and caring about ourselves, and we're kind and caring about other people. And so it's interesting, isn't it, in our society? I mean, how often do we sit in a cafe with friends, or sometimes going out for a drink or a dinner, and start talking about dying? In my experience, it happens very, very little. And even as a Buddhist who has thought about, meditated on death for quite a few years as well, it's not something that I've experienced people find fascinating, so fascinating that they want to talk about it. Usually there's other things that people want to, and it's often perhaps we know, really, in a way, it's a subject that we just don't know how to talk about. But it may be that we're not frightened of talking about death. We just don't know how to talk about it. We don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we can talk about what we feel when we think about death and dying, and it's something in the back of our mind all the time. Sometimes right at the back of our mind is that life has a certain limit to it, and that one day we will use up that allotted time, as it were, and we will be faced with passing on in one way or another. And the last couple of years I have seen people pass on. My father died last year. Fortunately, died at home, and but you could see him kind of gradually fading away. He was 103, so he had a kind of good innings, as they say in England in the cricket. But just recently, a good friend of mine, of ours, in Manchester, who had been ill with, she had an illness that she was dying from, basically. She just passed away last Sunday. And yesterday we had an open space. It was actually online as well, but it was in one of the Buddhist centres for her. And she was someone that, she started a group actually in Manchester, the Manchester Buddhist Centre, where people met specifically to talk about dying. And I think it was called something like Relax and Open. And I can't remember what it was called, Rot anyway, and the word tea. But I thought it was really interesting that people had this quite a courageous way, or an interest way, of actually sitting down purposely discussing death and their attitude towards it, their feelings for it, and so on. But I've come beginning to realize more and more it's like reflecting on nature. We come alive, we live our lives, and then we die. It's everything in nature's like that. And sometimes it's easier to approach in nature. We can see the trees certainly in the UK, where the trees seem to die in the autumn and then come alive in the spring. It's a big reminder. And from time to time we lose near and dear people and pass away. But this sort of almost like season or rotation, or the natural way of life, that things come into being and then pass away, and coming to terms with the fact that it does have an end, at least in this life, that our life as we know it at the moment will come to an end. Coming to terms with that, even having a near-death experience for those who've had it, seems to be a very positive thing, and it may be something we might reflect on and do with other people, if just as an experiment, if we wanted to. But it is very, very interesting, the idea that coming closer to death allows us to live more fully in the present. So if we're always trying to tuck something away and keep something hidden and not face it, we're actually using a certain amount of our energy and life force, I suppose, just keeping that thing hidden away. And usually these things are much better brought out into the open and coming to terms with, accepting, and benefiting from in many ways. Yesterday also, there was, I happened to spend a bit more time looking at the news. And of course, you're just on the news at the moment, there's just a lot of dying. There's a lot of death happening. And so it is much more in the forefront of our minds, whether we like it or not, just by looking at the newspapers, or reading the news, watching the news these days. So we are kind of confronted with it, and it's in a very unpleasant way. So it's not exactly helpful, I think, to see things like that. But then, of course, when we start reflecting on life as having a beginning and end, we might start reflecting, as I said the other day, on what we're doing with our life and what's important to us in our life. And it's also, I found myself reflecting on the war in the Ukraine, and that, the people are fighting for something. The Ukrainians are desperately trying to fight for, I guess, their freedom. And that's what I assume, really resonate with, that I certainly do, is that we all want to be free, to have the opportunity to be free in our lives and to be able to live the life in the way that we want to. And as my mind just goes from one thing to another, then the question came up, well, what do you do with that freedom? If it's so valuable to us that we're prepared to die for it, even as some of the soldiers are, and others fighting for that, it's so dear. What do we do with the freedom when we have it? And for those of us that experience, a great deal of freedom, what are we doing with our freedom? And it may be when we don't know what to do with our life, what we can do with this freedom that we have, and it's relative freedom as well, because there's quite a lot of things we have to do in life that we're not free from. It can be quite disturbing as well. So when we are free and we have that opportunity to do something more with our life, and we don't know what to do with it, this can be quite distressing. And so it's one of the aims, at least from my mind, of this whole program of the nature of mind, is like looking at what we can do with our life, with our freedom. And from my point of view, it seems to be that human life is very, very precious because of the opportunity of living a life that becomes meaningful. So it's as though if we take the view that at the end of our life, we will kind of leave this life, our consciousness will continue into a completely new other life. But what we do is we take something with us, a sort of a knowledge or something has happened in this life that's made this life worth living, that's kind of transferred, as it were, with our consciousness into the next life. It kind of makes rather a nice sort of package in a way, which for me is very, very important. That it then means that I take this life to be so precious, that it's such a precious opportunity to help my consciousness, or to develop my consciousness, make more of my consciousness, so that it will be continuing in the future. And I think that's a very positive way of looking at life. Basically, whatever we think about anything, really, we don't really absolutely know whether it's true or not. But this is, for me, a very, very positive way of understanding how to live my life, that it has a beginning. It's a precious opportunity to transform myself and to leave this life with more than what I had when I came into the life. And I think we have that opportunity every moment of the day. And those people that feel that they've done something with this sort of transformative process, when you face death, it makes it a lot easier, it seems. And you feel like, yes, you've taken this precious opportunity, you've done something, and it's you've learned something, as it were, and you haven't wasted it. And so sometimes it feels like we waste a lot of time in life, and we can feel really bad about that. But perhaps even understanding that we sometimes wasting our life is in itself a transformative thought, or a transformative something that will help us to feel that we've done something with our life when it comes to the point where we have to leave it. And I guess by even being here in this group, being here together, with sort of over about 100 people. So we're all interested in this. We're all interested in, maybe we don't even know that, but there is something that's stirring within us to, consider what is the point, what is consciousness, what's the nature of mind. So then you have this sense of, okay, well, human life is precious, and how do I make the most of it? You might think, oh, Sona's going to say, well, you meditate. But I don't think, I think we could look at it in another way. One of the things that you can see about the Ukrainian war is that there is a lot of death and dying and suffering, but there's quite a lot of focus in the media on something very, very positive. The response of so many other people to want to help. So maybe we kind of, it's so obvious that we want to help, we miss that bit, but just like millions and millions of people are wanting to help the people who are suffering in that situation. And so that, if there's nothing good about wars, but at least sometimes it brings out the underlying kindness and caring that we have in a much more powerful way than we perhaps normally will experience it. That's something that struck me yesterday, of all the people. In fact, I found it very, very moving seeing so many people collecting money, collecting things to sell, and just making things helpful for others. So this seems to, then moving on, this seems to suggest that we have some underlying tendencies or underlying experiences that we don't always tap into. And it sometimes needs a bit of a crisis or a bit of a shake-up for us to recognize that they're there. So being kind, being caring, being compassionate is something we're familiar with in words, and we're familiar with in feelings. When we some of us don't feel kind, we just are kind, we just do kind things. But one of the principles of, one of the things that you can discover with consciousness is that actually you can go deeper and deeper into what these underlying things are. So far in these last couple of days, we've been just looking at kind of things that are happening, as it were, on the surface of our minds, thoughts that are coming, and just noticing how thoughts come, and those thoughts generate other thoughts and so on. But it's very much on the surface of the mind. One of the things that people find they're attracted to meditation for is not just this ability to bring together in a kind of more, you could say, integrating or a wholesome way, where we feel that our energies are flowing together in a normal human way. But we sometimes get this sort of sense that there's something much deeper, and occasionally we can dip down and we can experience this something under the surface, which is very, very beautiful. It's there's a lot of energy, beautiful energy that can flow out into, I was going to say into the world, but it initially flows out into our experience, through our experience and into the world. Unfortunately, when you all know this by now because you've been practicing this, that when you sit down to meditate, your mind's often all over the place, isn't it? It kind of, no one's nodding, but I assume it is. My mind is, you're kind of carried away by your thoughts. And, I'm suggesting just stay with your breathing and you might drop deeper in. But what we find is, well, that's a good idea. Oh, that's an idea. And then we think about the idea of dropping in instead of actually the experience of it. But it is possible to do that. Unfortunately, and Maitreya Bandhu went into this quite a bit on the first week of meditations that he led, is that we have these hindrances, as they're often called, the nivaranas in Buddhist terminology, or blockages to accessing these other layers, as it were, of our consciousness. And these are it's quite useful to know what they are, because in ordinary life we can do our best to work with them. And so I just like to mention what they are. And the first is, of course, craving for things. We want things. And this is said by the Buddha to be like a pond that has dye poured into it. It's usually connected with sensual desires. We have a strong desire through our senses for something. So instead of looking at a pond and looking for a clear reflection, what we see is like water that's mixed up with something like turmeric or some other sort of dye, so that it's kind of cloudy. We can't see through it. And then we have, and we probably will have an experience of this from what's going on in the world at the moment. We have what's called ill will, even hatred. And this is likened to clear water that's boiling. Like if you see what's happening in Ukraine and you feel this kind of energy, this anger, it does really feel like hot and boiling. A lot of energy coming up, and it's kind of all kind of over the place. It's very disturbing. So that's another one of the blockages, is this sensual craving for sensual desire and ill will and aversion. Another blockage that we have, and it's easy to suffer from, is what is called sloth and torpor. It's that kind of feeling that you can't do anything. You've got no energy for it. You just kind of, it's a bit like, well, the Buddha he uses the image of water that's covered with plants and algae. So you can't really move through it. You can't see through it. It's just kind of still. And I was reminded of this. There's actually a pond, beautiful pond in Adistana, that when you walk by, half of it is like that. It's like Sloth and Torpor. It's actually a beautiful green carpet, but at the other end of the pond is all clear water. And so some people suffer from that. They know what that feels like. And another hindrance is all kind of rather unpleasant, these things, aren't they? But if one comes to terms with them, you can start working on them. The other is restlessness and anxiety. So there will be a lot of that going on with people, particularly the anxiety. And this is a bit like water that's kind of whipped up into waves, like a choppy sea. So there's nothing to sort of settle in. You can't just remain still. You just sit down and then you're kind of thrown around again. And finally, the other blockage is we just don't know what to do. We're not sure that what we do is the right thing to do. So it's called doubt and indecision. And it kind of blocks all our energy. So we see these blockages kind of, as it were, along the surface of our mind, that if we could work with in our ordinary day life, we could drop deeper beneath them when we meditate. That's basically what I wanted to say today. And that what's kind of waiting for us in this depth beneath the surface is something very, very beautiful. There's a lot more energy that's kind of wanting to flow out, a lot, which will give us a lot more confidence. And it kind of is it's kind of a system that feeds itself in a very positive way. So the more sort of energy that we get from our depths, the easier it is to keep the blockages, keep the water clear, to remove these blockages and allow ourselves to go deeper. So this is an aspect of the nature of mind, is to perhaps consider that your consciousness is only part of it is really available to you, and that there's other aspects of it that you kind of know are there, but you just don't know how to get to it, how to discover it, how to release it, and how for it to sort of flow up and participate in the everyday life that we live, and so forth. So in the meditation today, we're going to again just be sitting with our thoughts and anchoring ourselves around the breath. Tomorrow we'll do a slightly different meditation actually, and we'll do that. And it may be interesting just to notice if a particular one of these blockages is there. It can pretty much guarantee one of them will be. And the great thing is, well, not the great thing is, but the way to approach this is, it's a great thing I'm noticing it. Here's a blockage. I'm feeling I've got no energy. I've just got sloth and torpor. I just can't be bothered doing anything. It's going to end. And we can think, a sloth and torpor is there. This will give us some stirring of energy, and it might allow it. Of course, our energy might be just, I'm really angry, and you could think of boiling water, let's say, use that image, and a wildness, energy that's just all over the place, and you can just accept it and allow it. The more you accept these things, they clear. It's as though water clears. If it's got dye in it, if there's too much sensual desire, it clears. If it's bubbling up with anxiety, if there's no energy, that's probably the hardest one, is to get the energy flowing from sloth and torpor. And if you notice that you have any thoughts about doubts or indecisions, you just see them as doubts and indecisions, but don't sort of get carried away with thinking about the doubts and indecisions. It's just practice coming back to noticing, oh, there's a doubt, there's an indecision, and do all this very lightly. It's if you sort of get really serious about it, sort of frown and look at, I want to find one of these hindrances, that would be a hindrance in itself. So it's a much more a case of like relaxing back into just focusing on something, and you will notice something will emerge, or you will just feel in a certain sort of way, and you can think, oh, this is one of those blockages. It's interesting. And you can think, well, how do you deal with this? There are traditional ways of dealing with it. One is to just try and let it pass like a cloud. Another is to develop the opposite. So if you have sloth and torpor, just think of something really energetic, like, what you enjoy doing that brings you energy, and that might be a way of working with it. You can also consider the consequences of what would happen if I just keep thinking about this thing over and over again. Is it going to be helpful? And you can see the consequences of what that would lead to, for instance. And they're the main ways of it. You can sometimes forcibly repress and move apart these hindrances, but that's something perhaps a last resort to do that. But the usual thing is just to notice things, and almost by themselves they're clear. So I'd just like to move on now to the meditation, because that's probably what we've been waiting for. And I'm going to stop talking, but I will just remind you through the meditation that to perhaps learn to accept and work with the mind, just see what happens, having this sense of investigating, curiosity of what consciousness is. It's flowing. You can feel it flowing because it goes from one thing to another. It doesn't just stay static. And it may flow very slowly, it may flow very, very fast in a bubbly sort of way, but you can just notice it. And if you kind of get a bit confused, you just keep coming back to the breath and experiencing the breath. And that's sort of going on in the background all the whole time. The rhythm of breathing in, breathing out, breathing in and breathing out. And just noticing what the nature of mind is doing. So you first of all need to prepare yourself by probably not looking at the screen, maybe closing your eyes. You're free to, those of you who've got the camera on, if you wanted to turn sideways on and not look at the camera, but you feel like it makes you feel as though you're more present by having your camera on. You can do that, and no one's going to, if you want to turn your back on the camera, it's fine as well. It's nice to know, it's nice for me to see people, but you don't have to do that. Anyway, you don't need to look at the camera. You don't really need to do anything, actually. Maybe the only thing you need to do is become aware of how you're sitting and noticing any tensions, any holding you have in the body. And maybe this is what we're all longing for, a sense of freedom from having to do anything. Freedom to just allow the mind, a consciousness, the flow of thoughts and experiences to settle. So we're not like one of those small insects that hops around on top of a pond on the surface tension of the water. Sometimes I can imagine feeling like that. I think of that, one of those small insects. It's in summer. But becoming much more like the pond, that there's a stillness, an underlying stillness, which is full of energy. It's almost confounding, really, to think of stillness and energy coming together, but it's that feeling of potential as you become calmer. And by focusing on your breathing, usually it has this sends a message to the brain, sends a message into our body of calming. It's a very calming activity, just focusing. You don't have to do anything to your breathing, just becoming aware of breathing. You would gradually, if you haven't noticed it already, you will gradually notice that it has a very calming effect. It's actually altering our autonomic system. The fight, particularly the fight and flight activity of our brain. So we're going to meditate for about 30 minutes. Sometimes people talk about hindrances as something you have to work with. I don't really like thinking of them in that way. I think thinking of them as like blockages to something beautiful is a much more helpful, interesting way. And working on them maybe isn't the right way of going about it. It's more a case of allowing blockages to settle, or where it's needed to feel more alive, without sort of forcing anything. Coming closer to whatever it is that's going on in our mind, breathing with it. If it seems to be a bit stuck, or a bit emotionally loaded, or if our thoughts are just constantly changing, and every now and again we may get this sense of, I could just drop a bit deeper, feel more open. And this is where silence is very helpful. Sitting in the silence, the stillness. just going to read you a little kind of verse, really, a few verses that was found on a retreat that I was on in West Yorkshire, on a chapel wall, actually. It's you could call it, I think people call this a poem called Listen, because each line starts with listen. Maybe that's what we can do in this meditation. Listen to the fragile feelings, not the clashing fury. Listen to the quiet sounds, not the loud clamour. Listen to the steady heartbeat, not to the noisy confusion. Listen to the hidden voices, not to the obvious chatter. Listen to the deep harmonies, not the surface discord. So in case you weren't here in the previous sessions, we're just using our breath as a kind of anchor, like we would anchor a boat on the sea into one place. And mind will float around that anchor, so the anchor is the breath, the experience of breathing, in whatever way we experience it. And then we can just listen. They're just reminding us that there's this potential of finding these deeper harmonies, but we need to generate and find a degree of stillness. And we're alive, we're breathing. Every single one of us is breathing. And the rhythm of our breath, the beginning and ending, is just the nature of being alive. And sometimes you get a sense, just a moment of what it feels like to be still. Some people would say to be at peace, to be tranquil. And the moment goes, and we think about it, there's that moment. So we just come back, and it's more useful just paying attention to your breathing. And so that's the way in, the way to open up and free up deeper energy. Deeper knowledge, stronger, more beautiful emotions. We find our mind is floating away, and we might like to just return to this present moment, embodied. And we don't even need to think in those terms, we just need to become aware of our breathing. We're aware of our breathing, we'll be completely present in this moment, wherever we are, at this time, in this body. letting go of the thoughts, just refocusing on the experience of the breath flowing in and flowing out. And if there is a lot of disturbance or a lack of energy, then just maybe contemplating, just reflecting on this is one of those blockages. And what's happening now for us? What are we doing? I'm just saying that in case we floated off somewhere, got lost. So we might like to come back to the experience, the rhythm of breathing, the inflow and outflow, and rise and fall. If you would like an image of what it's like to open up and how to approach this opening up to a deeper level of mind, it's like a flower, often the image of a lotus, where the petals can't be ripped open, ripped back. We just need to allow them to naturally unfold, opening up. And just in case you're feeling that it's difficult to do this, it's perhaps useful to remember that a lotus grows in a pond with its roots in the mud. So we could think of our life as being rooted in the confusion, the darkness, the mud of ordinary life. And that's actually where it gets its nutrients, the lotus. So whatever we are, whatever we're doing, we're feeding this ability to move towards the light, if we want to use that metaphor, like a lotus in water moving towards the surface where petals will naturally open. So this really is about including the whole of our being, even the bits we don't like, we may be ashamed of, just letting them be and recognizing that our roots can also find nutrients, nourishment from all those experiences, be drawn together and feed this process of growth, unfolding. We don't want to cut off the roots. They're all part of our being. And there are many things that will just change naturally if we allow them to. Maybe this same approach applies to our mind if we start to feel as though we're opening up so much we're floating away. Just remember that we're in a body. This body is breathing. So we don't want to leave anything behind. We just want to integrate everything, every aspect of our being, including our physical body. So that everything is benefiting from just sitting here. Experiencing our breathing. And just before we finish the meditation, let's just perhaps reflect on what's happened during this nearly half an hour of sitting. You don't need to be judgmental about it. You can just recognize, oh, this happened, and this happened, and then that happened. Maybe you fell asleep and you woke up. Maybe something arose in your mind. Something could have been pleasant or unpleasant. Just allowing us kind of more everyday consciousness to recognize, become aware of what happened. And if you feel as though anything's changed, just kind of allowing that to be there. And you may learn something from what happened today if you meditate, or when you meditate again. Maybe something you did you could apply, particularly if it was helping to unblock, to open up. But each meditation usually is itself. It's not the same, it's never the same. Different things happen. But we can learn approaches to using our mind, kind of working like an artist works with materials, with the mind. So those of you who need to go, just to say goodbye for now. Hope to see you again tomorrow. I hope to feel your presence again tomorrow. Can't see you. And those who don't have to rush off to anything particular, if you've got any questions or anything you'd like to share, then just get in touch with Nick. He'll feed me a question. Do that in the chat box or raise your hand, I think, in the reaction.
There's lots of thank yous coming through from Kathy, Kalyani, Annie, Anthony, Simon, Gina, Dot, Mary, Kedrick, Jess. Yeah, lots of thank yous.
A bit overwhelmed. if you want to just share anything that happened, even if you haven't got any questions, then you can feel free to do that too sometimes.
So Jess is asking, could you say any more about dealing with sleepiness?
Um, well, yesterday I mentioned about sleepiness, just giving yourself permission to have a little sleep. I mean, let's face it, most of us are probably very tired a lot of the time. And sometimes when you sit still and you just not doing anything, you can have it kind of comes to you exactly how tired you are. For anyone who's been on a retreat will know this. And if you ever go on a retreat, you'll probably notice it. The first day, you're usually feeling exhausted. You just feel like you want to sleep all the time. And it's as though this kind of like a busload of tiredness comes and bashes into you, and you just feel tired. So the same thing will happen in these short sessions of meditation, that some people will feel tired. And yes, it's not easy to deal with tiredness. It's not easy because if you start forcing yourself to be awake, which works for some people, you can do that by opening your eyes and not. As I said yesterday, you can also give yourself permission to have a little sleep. And if you fell asleep for 2 or 3 minutes, you probably certainly it's what I do if I'm tired, really tired, particularly if I'm not leading. It's a bit difficult if you're leading, falling asleep. But I find it so horrible when I'm tired and I feel like I ought to be doing something instead of just like relaxing back. And if you're on a chair, it's relatively safe. You're not going to fall off it probably. You could just have a little cat nap. And boom, you're awake again. If it goes on for too long and you're always feeling sleepy when you try to meditate, you probably need to look a little bit more closely at what you're doing in your life. And usually, I think a lot of people feel sleepy if they meditate later in the day. So what I always do on a retreat is I try and have a little sleep before an afternoon meditation. And then when I meditate, I'm not using that time to catch up on my sleep. So I'm kind of energized. So if it's something that's an ongoing difficulty, it probably does require looking at how you could perhaps get more sleep. And unfortunately, getting sleep isn't an easy factor. A lot of people don't sleep well these days, and so a lot of people are tired. But there may be times when you can take very short little breaks in the day and just close your eyes and drift off. And maybe you could train yourself in that to some degree. If you particularly have difficulty sleeping at night, it's the usual time to sleep. So it's a big area, sleep. But these are the things that come to my mind when you're meditating.
So Harvey's saying, I sometimes find it difficult to distinguish the meditation dropping deeper from just sloth and torpor.
Very good question. Yeah, I sometimes, I know exactly what you mean. Sometimes I think I've had this wonderful meditation and I realise I've actually kind of fallen asleep and feel refreshed afterwards. Maybe you just have to sit with that question, Harvey, and I think it will become clearer. It kind of contemplating the energy that you feel. Is the energy one of kind of torpor, which is like a blockage, sort of there's no energy there? Or is it a sort of a feeling of, dare I say, sort of relaxation or opening? So it's kind of like probably just noticing it, and I think that's the way you work with it, really. It's just that you begin to feel, actually, I need a bit more stimulation. if you actually need more stimulation in meditating, it might be useful to actually purposely think about something. So, or use a metaphor, like I talked about taming a horse. I find something like that quite stimulating, the idea of taming my mind. And what would you do with a horse if it was like, didn't really want to walk? It was too tired to walk. It was just experiencing so much sloth and torpor. You might have to sort of hey, come on, and so whisper to the horse to come alive in a way. So, you could perhaps approach things in that way. So it is probably the most difficult blockage to deal with, because there isn't much energy to do anything actually with it.
So Paul is saying, as I meditate, I can become tranquil and calm, but I feel like I carry the same stuff and stay on the surface. It can feel frustrating. I keep thinking there's a doorway to another form of awareness, but I go past it and feel I don't get into any depth. Is this normal?
Well, let's say it's normal if you start meditating and you just do a little bit each day. It's pretty normal to not find a way into going deeper. If you've got very supportive conditions, like you've got time, which is kind of very precious these days and difficult. You've got time like being on what we call a retreat, where you actually spend quite a big part of the day practicing. You're more likely to start experiencing these moments of opening. If you've got a beginner's mind, you don't know what's going to happen, that's also a very good state to be in, because anything can happen. If you're kind of like looking for dropping deeper, you're probably not going to drop deeper, because that's what you're kind of focusing on. So it is very much a case of well, first of all, it requires a lot of patience. It's like a lot of things that you want to become good at. You have to put the time in, a certain amount of energy and patience, and it takes a long time to become good at it. To be able just to access going deeper at will is something that might be very desirable, but is probably not very realistic for most people. Unless you were a full-time meditator and that's all you ever did. And then you might even then suffer from sloth and torpor because you're not doing enough activities. So we expect things these days to arrive straight away. Some of us sign up for things like Amazon Prime, so we get whatever it is we order the next day immediately. So we sometimes take this attitude into trying to meditate. I'm going to meditate and watch my breath. Right, where's this opening? And you want it to happen immediately, but it's much more like the growth of a flower. If you've got a garden, those of you who've got gardens, you can't rush it. Everything has its season. You prepare the soil, you make sure there's nutrients in the soil, you remove the weeds, you get as much sunlight on the plants as you can, and then things will naturally grow, or not. Sometimes they don't grow. But usually if you get the conditions right for developing the mind will sort of grow in that more organic, natural way. You can't really push it. And if you're sitting looking at a flower, waiting it to blossom, right, it's going to take a long time, isn't it? If you're sitting waiting for your mind to go deeper, it's probably not going to happen very easily. If you just have this idea that it can go deeper and you can open up, you may be surprised one day when it's opening up. But I'll just share something with you about my own life. I started meditating when I was in my early 20s. And I would say probably for the first 12 years, I had very little experience of of going deeper in meditation. My mind just seemed to wander here and there. Just maybe occasionally I had a sense of stillness. But what I did notice is that outside meditation, I was changing. And I think that's far more important than having a good meditation. it's sometimes things happen to you that you just don't even know are happening to you when you're doing them. So you probably need a bit of faith in this, but it kind of is a feedback loop that will give you confidence. If you start practicing meditation regularly, even a little bit each day, ideally longer, as much as you can, and the more you do, the probably the bigger effect. And then just be aware of how you're dealing with things in the day. For instance, if you're getting angry about things, you may notice that you're not getting angry so often, or at least you're catching yourself when you are angry. Just before you start arguing with someone, you might notice, you think, do I need to do this? And that would change your life. And that would be the effects of meditation. So it's far more useful to think of meditation, the effects of meditation, outside of the meditation, rather than being waiting for experiences to happen in the meditation. So it's kind of, the meditation is just a place of being, and then not getting frustrated if nothing's happening, because a lot more might be happening than you realize. So I think that's quite a useful way of looking at things. Might not have answered your question exactly how you wanted it answered, but I think that's useful. Anything else, Nick?
So Becca is saying the metaphors of the hindrances as various states of water were incredibly helpful. I felt both a powerful choppiness as well as a bubbling of anger. A question, is there a water metaphor for doubt and indecision?
Oh, there is. Didn't I mention that? In fact, I did a little PowerPoint a while ago. I should have. I don't think you could see it actually if I held it up, but it's actually a photograph of muddy, turbid water. Can you see that? I can just about see it on my camera. So it's like dark, muddy water that's kind of doing this, and it's compared to looking into water. You want to see the reflection maybe of yourself, but the water's turbid, it's unsettled, it's muddy, it's kind of in the dark. So that's the kind of metaphor for that. Sorry, I didn't mention it earlier. If I find a way of sharing this little PowerPoint on nature of mind, I'll just make it available. Just a few. What I found very interesting was finding images that actually describe these states of mind. So I just looked at Unsplashed or something like that to find some images that kind of represented these things, and it had quite a transformative effect. First of all, I can remember all the hindrances, quite easily, because I have a visual mind, really. Anyway, just by the way. Okay.
So that's it for questions, but there's a couple of comments here. So Katrina says, I'm interested in you using the word blockage to describe the hindrances. I feel that I'm working with them rather than a blockage. Interesting to consider how descriptive words give different experience in meditation.
Yeah. Well, the original word is nivarana, and it can be translated as a hindrance, something that's hindering you from getting something, or stoppage, something that's stopping you, or blockage. And I don't know whether it's partly because I used to be an engineer, but I like this word, blockage. I think Mike Trabandoo talked about it as a covering. It's as though something's covering up something else. So I think one of the dangers when you talk about hindrances, it does, for a lot of people, it means they have to work with them. It's like working with the hindrances. You have to kind of grit your teeth and get a frown and work with it. But the actual working isn't the working; it's a kind of opening up to. So another engineering term is a bit like if you've got blocked drain and you can put down some sort of fluid that just dissolves all the blockage away. that would be a not very pleasant image. Actually, it's not a beautiful one. It's probably in a gardening thing. It would be like giving a bit more, making sure the plant's in the sun and feeding it, giving it water to remove its thirst. And that would be kind of more beautiful sort of way of looking at it. So yeah, just noticing that actually a lot of the time we're just hindering ourselves, using that word hinder, from experiences that we could be having. Just to give you an example, and this would be quite useful in the next thing I'm going to say, is that, and I mentioned this before, certain things in your life that we do which are connected with one or another of these hindrances will give us a kind of kinesthetic, a bodily experience of tightness, of crampedness, of things being held in tension. And then other things we would do will give us a sense of opening, relaxing, and expansion. And the most obvious one that comes to mind to me is when you're being helpful to someone. About 20 years ago, I decided that I wanted to be a carer to someone. It happens to be my wife now, Vidimala. And I would say that deciding to care for someone else, and quite deliberately and putting a lot of time into it, transformed my life completely. And before that, I used to experience a lot of inner emptiness, a lot of dissatisfaction. And just putting someone, as it were, before me, and bringing out a generous, it just seemed to open out, gave me a sense of openness and flexibility and freedom that seemed to allow something to fill up this emptiness that I used to feel. And so, giving things. I'm going to ask you for some money in a moment, so this would be a moment where you could do that. But what I really like to get across to you, you can tell often when you're in a state of where there's more of a sort of something blocking or hindering you from something greater. Is because there's often, it feels like, for me, it feels like a tightness, a crampedness, a narrowness. And then I look for things to do that actually take that away, that open up, make me feel more like I can be creative. I can respond much more freely to a situation. An argument might be a good example. Someone irritates you, someone close to you often, they say something, and you feel like you want to say something back, or you get an email and it's criticizing you, and you just want to type down something back. And the whole movement is like one of tightness and fighting, and sometimes that's quite good to get your energy going, but often it's just a reaction. It's like someone's pressed a button, but you do this. So if you can be more open, more flexible, wider, when the things happen that we don't like in life, we can give ourselves space to consider how to best, more creatively work with that. And the things that we do find are really helpful in life, we can see that as a kind of positive feedback loop where we just think, oh, when I do this, I feel so much better. So let's do more of it, and more of it, and more of it. And so it kind of keeps feeding in, and your spaciousness becomes more. You can get to a point where you can even feel like your consciousness is all around you rather than just stuck inside you. I mean, often we think of mind as being inside, but maybe it's interesting to think of mind as being all around us. And maybe when we meet another person, who's got Patrick sitting near me, maybe his mind and my mind are overlapping in some sort of strange, weird, wonderful way. And he's sitting there so still and calm, it's probably making me feel still and calm. And maybe my talking is making him a little bit excited, and so he's feeling. So we're kind of overlapping, and it's very nice, a very pleasant sitting here with Patrick. So I'm going to just ask you now, there's not many people that are trying to help other people work with their minds to open up to become much more creative. The main aim of this project, as far as I can see, is to get out to as many people and with the same message that exploring the nature of mind and opening up is such a wonderful thing. It's wonderful for the individual, and collectively is wonderful for society, the family, for society, for the sort of tribe you live with, for the whole world. It's such a wonderful thing to do. So if you'd like to support us in this work, and you haven't done so at the moment, you could make a donation and watch how you feel as you make that donation. You might at first feel a tightness, like you don't really want to part with money, or because we prefer money. We don't have a way of dealing with gifts of clothes and things like that, but some money transferred into the bank account where we can support this. Just notice how, well, I notice a sort of tightness, and then when I do it, I think, I kind of feel good about myself, and this is sort of like brightening and opening up, and then I wonder why I'm not doing it all the time. So that's something else to reflect on. But just at this moment, if you're feeling like that and you'd like to experiment and you would like to give some money or some more money, then please support us in this work. We would like this project to continue way into the future and grow and involve a lot more people. So this is kind of a pilot scheme, and you're all helping us to discover, work with, and develop this project. So if you'd like to support us, I think Nick's going to put in a link to the. And if you wanted a figure, I like people to suggest a figure to me of how much to give. Something like £50 would really go a long way to helping us keep this project going. And just lastly, I'd just like to say that we're going to. There's some events happening later in the year. One event I'm on in September is the kind of culmination of this first stage of this nature of mind. It'd be a retreat here at Adhisthana. It'd be quite a large retreat, we hope. Maitra Bandhu and the team, Vidyamala, Yanavacha, and so on. And we get to meet in person. And if you can't meet, if you're living abroad or it's not possible for you to come, it'll be online as well, I believe. So just to highlight that, and you can find details of that on the Adhisthana website. So I think I'd better leave it there, actually, and leave you opening your hearts and going off into your day or to your night with a sense of freedom. So I hope that's happened, and I hope you come back tomorrow, and I'll see you tomorrow. We're going to do a different meditation tomorrow, so we won't be just exploring the breathing and thoughts. So I won't tell you what it is. It'll be a bit mystery to look forward to. So
thank you very much.
Unmute everyone now if you want to say goodbye.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's
Thank you so
wonderful.
much.
Everyone.
Tomorrow.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.